Now, during his medium-term budget speech, the finance minister said he couldn't confirm if the 350 rand social relief of distress grant would be extended beyond March next year. Around 9.5 million people depend on that grant. Now, Isobel Frye is the director of the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, and she wrote a very powerful, a simple but very powerful piece that is published on IOL that says that for the pro-poor policy to be successful, it must be by design and not default. And she joins us now virtually. Isobel, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, in this piece that you wrote, you said you had a moment to sit in the company of the finance minister before he delivered his medium-term budget statement. And in that meeting is when you had a bit of a moment. And it was when the finance minister stated that he actually thinks there's not enough appreciation for what the Treasury does or what his department does for the poor. Tell us what that moment was for you. What did you realize in that moment?
Thanks, Marcel. The point was that the finance minister, as he repeated yesterday, was saying in essence that his government, that National Treasury, spends most of the expenditure as pro-poor, and therefore he can't understand why people are critical of the allocations that they make and the choices that they make in terms of amount of tax to raise and the amount of tax to distribute. Now, on one hand, there is a way in which you can say that because the allocation goes to poor people, it must be pro-poor. But in essence, and my kind of reflection was, what our government does is it raises taxes and it spends on people. That's what governments do across the world. The fact that the majority of people in South Africa are poor, and hence the majority of people who receive government allocations are poor, does not make that expenditure pro-poor. And I think having worked around poverty alleviation policies and social security policy for about 20 years now, it was that moment when I suddenly realized why we're having different conversations. Because the people in the room are not bad people. We respect each other as people with principles who want to see a democratic government working. We want to see South Africa prospering. But there's massive disagreement on how we get there. And for me, that was the point, is in order to address the levels of poverty that we have in South Africa, which are, Marcel, I mean, they are critical levels of poverty. Yeah. They are, the levels of poverty that we have are not seen in other countries in which we have the levels of wealth as well. So we're the most unequal country in the world. Our levels of unemployment are rising. And what I don't understand is why we don't seem to be tackling this as a critical issue. And then being able to realize that for many people who are working in government, they're saying, we're doing our job, therefore that should be good enough. What I realized was, in order to break those cycles of poverty, we need to have specific pro-poor policies that actually intervene and through government action, bring people to a state where they are able to be catalyzed into a state of non-poverty that goes beyond that. So just giving people handouts because they're poor is not pro-poor spending. That's charity. But giving people the kind of catalytic dynamic which enables them to move into areas of basically being involved in the economy, now that's pro-poor spending. And we haven't seen that in this country because a lot of the advice that we get at a national policy level are from people who see poverty as being a slight variation from the norm. For us, poverty is the norm. Now, if we're wanting to move people out of that extreme, where the majority of people live in a state of dysfunction, and we want to move our society into an inclusive, prosperous, growing economy, we need to think completely differently.
At the same time, Isobel, it really isn't a rocket science. I mean, you say in this article that you've published that the success of government and how it cares for its populace shouldn't be about how much money. Look here, look at all this money that we've spent on the poor. It should be on how you are spending that money and how you're bringing down the number of people that are dependent on, let's face it, a 350 rand social distress relief grant. That's an indictment on our government, that is what people are begging for, just so that they can try and put food on the table. what more can be done? I mean, you sat in a room with the finance minister. They're gathering the right people in the room. Why are they not listening? Because surely, what is the saying? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result. Something's got to give.
Something has got to give. Now, at the beginning of the week, I attended the launch of the book by some of your peers, 8 Days in July. And what interested me was the level of certainty that the three authors had, that the tinderbox nature of our society is basically waiting for the next explosion. The level of hopelessness and the level of disassociation between so many millions of people, and we're talking millions of people, 22 million adults are not in employment, education, or training. Although the official unemployment figure is much lower, those are the number of people who are not included when we start talking about plans for the future, about dreams and hopes, and about sacrifices possibly that would need to be made in order to have a better life tomorrow. For 22 million adults in South Africa, there is no real idea that tomorrow will be at all better than today, and that my actions today need to be rational because I'm going to be rewarded tomorrow. So the question that you asked, Marcel, is really good. What should be done? What can be done differently? I think a lot of it is just about being honest. Now, we know that National Treasury loves saying that we're spending a huge amount of money on social grants. And we know that many middle-class people talk about the fact, they pick up on the fact that we have greater number of social grants than many other developing countries. As you say, that's an indictment, firstly, to begin with, because these are all means-tested grants. You've got to be very poor to be eligible for a grant. Secondly, and this is the thing that really infuriates me, because I do keep on saying these things, and they're not social relief or distress grant, which has been going on for just over a year. The people who get these 18 million grants are children and old age people. We do not want them working. Children should be in school. Old age people have worked a full life and need to be able to give them the ability to stop working so hard. So those are buffers. Those are not the huge number of working age people who are not in any kind of employment. We have to look not only to the fact that this is a humanitarian crisis because people are hungry. A quarter of our South Africans are starving on a daily basis, but we're not reproducing the labor market. We're not reproducing society. So when young people are not able to set up their own households because they don't have jobs, that means that they don't become adults, they don't become parents, they don't start inculcating the norms and laws that a society has as the next generation takes the responsibility for raising their children and that generation. We are stuck in a stasis, and a lot of the media I've been looking at recently in the last 24 hours has been about the transformation because of F.W. de Klerk's passing, of course. Now, to an extent, we are stuck in that stasis, like something, an ant caught in amber, and we're not recognizing that. We're saying we're doing a good job. We're saying that we just need to continue to do what we're doing, and we can look for that small amount of GDP growth. I mean, the point is, we're being told that there will be redistribution once there is growth, but we've had a decade of no growth, or very, very low growth. So then the question is, if we're spending 100 billion rand on infrastructure, and at the same time we know that if we spend 100 billion rand per annum on people's grants, we can actually solve food poverty, because 100 billion rand is what it will cost for 1 year to lift everybody below the food poverty line above it. But those are just not questions or concepts or opportunity possibilities that we're engaging with. We get told there is a small amount and it has to be divided equally amongst people, and so we get a pittance. The point in the article, and I'm really pleased that you picked up on it, because these are the debates that we need to be having, is if we want to spend differently, how do we spend? And there is basically a maxim that you've got to be able to spend enough to make a change. So giving people enough, 350, which is not enough to meet the food poverty line even, and expecting that to have a catalytic change, that's madness. If, however, you look at the statistics that Stats SA brings out, and we look at the amount that goes into the upper bound poverty line of 1,300 Rand. And we see the econometric modeling that economists in South Africa, as well as our global partners, have done. We can see that the evidence is before us, that if we give enough people enough money, we kickstart the economy, we give that stimulus that's required. Because to say to someone you need to start a micro enterprise, when you live in a township where nobody has disposable income, nobody's going to be able to buy the fat cook, to buy the tomato, to keep that circulating. We have a problem in this country that there is no circulation, no sufficient circulation of income. And so there is no point in undertaking any economic activity because no one's going to reward you, buy your stock and enable you to go and buy new stock and sell that on again. What we're lacking is that equal distribution because we have a huge amount of wealth kept in the hands of very, very few, and it's not being used productively. Many of us are saying we're not talking about raising income tax. Right now, so few people are working. We need to encourage productivity. We need to encourage people to be working. We need to look at the fact that the wealth that was accumulated prior to 1994 has not been sufficiently redistributed. We need to look at ways in which we can unbundle, for instance, a fully paid government employees pension fund. We don't need to have that money sitting there because we're not going to have every single government employee retiring tomorrow.
But indeed, we do have to start somewhere, don't we? I'm so sorry to have to cut you short there. Isobel Frye is from the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute. Thank you so much for your insight this evening. She wrote a very strong piece on IOL called Pro-Poor Policy Must Be by Design and Not Default. I suggest you go and give it a read.